Hey guys, Phoenix here. Just a quick air-to-air refueling demonstration with a KC-135 MPRS that I have set up. This is a custom mission, nothing but me and him, just straight nose on to each other. About 25 miles apart, as you can see, closing at about 800 knots. And I'll do a quick intercept, and then just so you can see, I put the controls up on the left there.
In field 1-1, request rejoin.
Enfield 1-1, Texaco 1-1, proceed to pre-contact at 15,000 at 280.
So you can see what kind of control inputs I'm making to stay with the tanker and stay on the hose there. This is also a calm day. There's no turbulence, no winds, nothing else. This is basically the bog standard scenario you might get trying to refuel off a tanker. So the first thing is the intercept. Head-to-head, of course, is not ideal, but you can offset quite a bit and just pull yourself onto the tanker here. I like to keep the tanker stationary in the either bottom left or bottom right of my canopy there. You'll see what I mean when I make the turn to intercept here. And this is not, I'm sure this is not how they do it in real life, but this is how I've found it to be most expeditious within DCS. Okay, let's just freeze this for a second and talk about rejoins. Rejoin is possible from any aspect, of course, but the techniques I personally use are going to be different depending on where I'm coming from. For this demonstration, I picked pretty much the worst case scenario, which is head-on. If we were at a lower aspect, say a 90-degree intercept, you could just aim for a point ahead of the tanker where you think the tanker might be when you eventually reach it. In the event of a tail chase intercept, I typically close at mill thrust to reduce intercept time, unless my fuel level is critical enough to be a factor. Once I get close, I'll try to control my VC or closure rate using the radar. And for this, please use TWS or LTWS. Try not to STT lock the tanker. They don't have RWR, but I want us to get in the habit of only using STT lock when we have a purpose in mind for it, or if we're an ACM or something like that. For a rear aspect rejoin, I'll aim to make my VC equal to about 100 times the distance from the tanker. So for example, if I'm 1.5 miles or 1.5 miles behind the tanker, my VC should be 150 knots. At 1 mile, 100 knots, and so on and so forth. You can figure this out with the radar or by using the tanker's yardstick and the speed they stated when you called for rejoin. So if they said they were doing 260 knots and you're doing 310, then your VC should be somewhere around 50 knots. Once you get close, be sure to set your radar to silent on the DDI or standby by your right leg. And at this point, if you still need to know your VC, you'll need to reference your speed versus theirs and the yardstick for distance. I come up on the right because I know there's no one else here, and also because there's a bit of a bug with the MPRS right now where it actually it won't give you the left hose unless you line up on the right side for some reason. It'll just say return pre-contact constantly if you're lined up on the left. So here we go, we're going to intercept with the tanker. Idle power. And it's only doing 280, so I'm going to count on this hard turn to lose a bunch of speed. Keep it right in that left-hand quadrant of the canopy there. And come down pretty much right on top of it. Pull about 6 or 7 Gs to level out. That gets our speed down to 280, and here we are. So as I said, lined up on the right side of the tanker instead of the left, just to get around that bug. Under normal circumstances with wingmen around, you'd come up on the left-hand side of the tanker and then refuel in sequence. Get the probe out, and I also turned my radar to silent back there, so we don't irradiate any tanker crews. Of course, not modeled in DCS, but I like to keep things realistic. So we're going to creep up on him at about 10 knots of closure, roughly. We're only 0.1 miles from him. I can tell from the air-to-air TACAN there on the bottom right of the HUD. And when you get this close, you can start to use the visual closure rate as an indicator. Bit of a wobble there because I reached down to do something. Oh yeah, I turned off the overlay there. I'll turn it back on here. There we go.
Ready pre-contact.
So I say ready pre-contact. He says clear contact and then puts out the other hose. I'm going to have to go over there and get it. And I'm going to also switch the view out of VR just to steady it up a little bit so you can see the references I'm looking at here. Nice and gentle corrections. You can see I'm not deflecting the stick much at all. I have to get the trim right again. Make sure you trim the aileron so that it's perfectly level and it doesn't want to turn right or left. If you're fighting it, it's never going to work. The other rule is don't look at the basket. You're looking at the refueling pod under the left wingtip there, putting that right up at the top of the HUD glass, and that should be right on the level. Alright, I'm going to freeze it one more time and just talk about the sight picture here. By the way, these freezes were recorded after this video was originally produced, so it may sound a bit disjointed, but just bear with me. If you look at where I am here, right here when I get in contact, the refueling pod is lined up right in the middle of the HUD glass in the gap in the middle of the pitch ladder. As we go, I'm going to drift to the left a bit so the pod is actually on top of the right side of the HUD glass. This was not intentional. And you want to try to keep that pod right in the middle of the top of the HUD. You can't see it in this video, but the 10-degree pitch line should be pretty much aligned with the refueling pod on the tanker. This should work in theory for any of the three types of tankers we can refuel from, so the KC-130 Hercules, this one, which is the KC-135 MPRS, and our carrier-based S3B Viking. A slight adjustment in pitch ladder reference may need to be made for tankers with a shorter hose, so the Viking. The important points here are to keep the refueling pod centered at the top of the HUD glass, don't look at the basket, and keep your corrections tiny and smooth. Use the add thrust then take half off, or reduce thrust then add half back rule for forward and backwards adjustments. If you find the aircraft is rolling with no inputs from you, that means your trim is off and needs to be readjusted. On the subject of trim, you're going to notice that you'll need to adjust your aileron trim as you approach the tanker, as well as if you switch sides. This is due to the tanker's wake, which you're sitting just below. Once in position behind the basket, trim off any control forces before taking a stab at it. When ready, align the pod with the top of the HUD and add a little thrust to fly the probe into the basket. Then immediately take that thrust off to avoid overshooting the tanker. I'm going to unpause the video and just watch my throttle inputs as I connect.
Contact. You're taking fuel.
If you look at the basket, you're going to start generating pilot-induced oscillations. It's just going to get worse and worse as you get closer, so if that happens, just back off. Get the altitude back, match the tanker, and then run back in with these visual references. So keep that fueling pod, like I said, right on the top of that HUD glass right there. Really slight corrections with the stick. And we're not going to really get into if the tanker turns or anything like that in this one. It won't, just because that's once you should get level tanking mastered first before you start talking about turns. But turns are actually not that hard if the tanker does them smoothly. And that is a very light angle of bank, and all it is your new quote-unquote level becomes that bank angle that it takes up. So you make changes from there. So assume like 10 degrees is the same as wings level, and then make corrections left or right of that, rather than actual level. But when the tanker's actually level by itself, you can almost do this hands-off. Not quite, but almost. If you have it trimmed exactly. The other problem you're going to find, though, is as you take fuel, your aircraft, of course, is going to get heavier, and therefore it requires more thrust to maintain position on the tanker. So you'll see over the course of the whole refueling, my thrust level does increase slightly. I apologize for the jittering in the throttle axis. I've got an X52 Pro throttle that's been around for a while, and it does tend to, the sensor isn't the greatest, so it does jump a little bit. But I think you can kind of tell which ones are my deliberate movements versus which ones are just throttle jitter. So. And we're getting there, almost 9,000 pounds here. The other thing you can do is you can take glances at your velocity vector in the middle of the HUD there and keep it exactly lined up with that HUD glass. You can see as I let it drift up or down, that's when I start to go up or down on the tanker. So if you keep it exactly aligned with the level bar on the HUD, that can help too. But the most important part is that sight picture in the HUD with the fuel pod. It also helps to figure out exactly what speed the tanker's doing. So if you look at my airspeed, 283 I figured is precisely matched with the tanker. So if I see anything less than that, even 282, or more than that, 284, I know I'm going to be either falling behind or gaining on the tanker. And I can use that as a reference. There you go, transfer complete.
Disconnect.
Reduce thrust a little bit to drop back from the tanker, and down a little bit to get under it. Slide over to the other side, and take up right hold or right observation. Let whatever flight members you're with refuel. And then once you're away from the tanker a bit, you can stow the probe. I can't do it by feel because I don't have the switch for it, so I have to actually look down to do it. Stow the probe, and then I like to just slide up and say hi to the tanker guys. Ready to break away, you just initiate a nice easy right turn. I say easy right, I'm going to go, just to make it look good, I'm going to go a little steeper, but easy right turn away from the tanker and go about your business.